Thanks for joining me today. My name is Guy Britton, and in this video I'm going to show you how to get big punchy pop drums using a combination of live drums and samples to achieve that 80s inspired explosive pop drum sound, the kind of thing you're hearing on the likes of Chappell Roan and a lot of stuff like that at the moment. So before we get started, please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe, and let's get into it. So as always with drums, the most important thing before we begin is to make sure that we're starting with great source audio. In this case I'm using live drums, but you could be using drum samples, you could be using virtual drums, whatever it may be. The point is to make sure that the raw sound before we do any processing is really good. And in my case today, I'm using these live drums which have been recorded by Toby Partridge, who's a phenomenal drummer. He's recorded these drums for me remotely, and Toby's always great at making sure the drums are tuned properly, they're mic'd well, and that's so important, particularly with live drums, to make sure that the raw sound is really good. So in terms of what we got going on, we have all of these drum tracks down here which are being fed to this main drum bus. These tracks here are the fundamental groove of the song, and then we have this ride overdub as well as these tom fills which have also been overdubbed just to give us a bit of a cleaner sound and allow us to push the drums a bit more. I like to push these close mics, the kick in, the kick out, and if we've got a lot of bleed from cymbals and stuff, that makes that quite hard. So let me play you a bit of this track and then we'll look at exactly what processing is happening. So I like to start with the kick in and the snare top mic just to get a feel for what's going on with the sound. So firstly, I have this SSL E-Channel on the kick in mic, which is just doing some compression, letting the transient through with the slow attack, fast release. Then we're taking out a little bit of low mid, some gating as well, just to clean it up. And then on the snare, we're doing something very similar. Once again, some fast release, slow attack compression, cleaning it up with the gate, knocking out a little bit around 250 just to get rid of some resonance, and then boosting the top end. And this sounds like this. Super subtle, but it's clean and it adds a bit more focus to it. And then we have this kick out mic, which is a microphone on the outside of the kick drum. And this is doing a similar thing to the kick in mic. Again, a little bit of compression just to bring out the transient, cleaning it up with the gate, and then bringing out quite a bit, like 10 dB at 300 Hertz. And that sounds like this. It's always really important to check the phase between the kick in and the kick out mics or any samples that you're using. And I like to think of the phase invert more like a tone shift than a right or wrong situation. In this case, I prefer it disengaged because it gives it a little bit more punch. If we engage that phase reverse, it gives it more sub and more low frequency, but I actually quite like the punchiness for this track. So I'm going to leave this disengaged. Then we have the snare bottom mic, which I'm going to bring in here. Again, another instance of the SSL E-Channel. This time we're using the filter to clean up everything below about 170 Hertz. A little bit of compression, some gating again, and I'm just taking out this mid-range around about 2K. So that snare bottom mic is just adding a little bit more top end, and I'm actually bypassing the gate here because I like how that resonance from the kick drum is almost triggering the snare bottom mic to react, and it just gives the kick drum a little bit more brightness, which I quite like. So then I'm going to move to this sub track over here, which is a sub kick mic outside the kick drum, and what this is doing is just adding some low end depth to the kick. So at the moment I've got quite a lot of hard processing going on here. We're filtering everything above 3K. We're taking out 15 dB at 1.5K, which is quite extreme. And then again, a massive cut around 200 Hertz to get rid of all of that upper and low mid. So we're really just leaving the low frequencies and then gating that as well. And that sounds like this on its own. And then rather than boosting the low end in the EQ, what I'm actually doing is using our bass to give us more bass depth around about 55 Hertz. That's just going to give us some real weighty sub. So that's starting to shape up. It sounds more focused. What I want to do now is move on to the overheads, which is going to bring a bit more life to the kit. You hear on their own, they sound like this. I'm going to use the CLA 3A to bring a bit more snap and a bit more aggression to that. You can hear, or particularly on the left side of those overheads, there's like a bit of resonance, bit of ring, which we're going to EQ out using the REQ. So I'm dipping out around about 500 hertz and boosting some top end just to give it a bit more air. Let's hear this in context with the mix now to see how it's sounding. So you can hear, like, on their own, the drums sound pretty good, but in the mix, they still sound really feeble and they're just not quite cutting in. This is why it's so important to make sure that you're listening in the context of the mix and you're not just processing drums on their own. What I want to do is give it a bit more life, give it a bit more roominess. So I have this room mic over here, which currently is just a mono single room mic, which sounds like this. It's kind of gross, but I want to make it bigger and more roomy. So I'm going to use another instance of the SSL channel. This time we're doing some more compression, but more extreme compression, dipping out some upper mid around about 2K and then taking out quite a bit around 300 hertz as well. And that sounds like this. That compression is helping just elongate that snare and give it a bit more length. And then I'm running this into an instance of true verb to give it some roominess. With the rest of the kit, so that immediately brings it to life. It gives it way more energy and starts to put it in a space, but I feel like we can push this even further now. So what I want to do is move over to the drum bus over here, and you'll see I have firstly an instance of Magma BB Tubes, which is a really great plugin for adding some saturation and some energy, and that sounds like this. That's helping just to shave off the transients, bring up the lower energy and give the whole thing this sense that it's louder and bigger. Even though it's not actually louder when you look at it on the meters, it just gives it more energy because it's squashing that dynamic range using some tube saturation, and then that's blended in around about 58%. Then we're going to use another instance of the SSL channel, but this time on the whole drum bus. And this is just to take out some of that mid-range harshness, which is appearing around about 1.5K, and then a little bit of resonance around about 800 hertz, plus a bit of a bump in the low end. And that sounds like this. Just helps to make that snare smoother and not quite as harsh. Then we're going to follow this up with an instance of the SSL G-Comp, slow attack, fast release, and then we're blending this in around about 60% or so, and that sounds like this. Adding loads of energy and giving it much more punch. I'm really liking how that's sounding. So let's take a listen to a before and after of all the processing so far. Okay, it's really starting to shape up now, but I feel like we can just improve this even more. Firstly, what I want to do is add in a sample. I'm using the CR8 sampler, and this has got a Linn drum sample, which is a classic 80s drum machine used by Prince and all sorts of people for that sort of classic 80s sound. And this is just going to add a bit more bite to that snare if we take a listen to what it sounds like in the mix. And then we have this weird snare, which is another sample loaded into the CR8 sampler. Just literally drag and drop. I love this sampler. It's super easy and quick to use. And this is on every other snare. And this is just giving a bit of an accent, helping the groove develop a little bit more. Then I'm just going to add an instance of H-verb to give it a bit more width and a bit more drama. It's pretty cool, but it can be even more explosive. And in order to do that, we're going to use a classic trick, some gated reverb. So you'll see I have these sends down here on the kick and the snare, plus the snare samples. Currently, this bus 2 is feeding over here to this gated verb track, which is an instance of the Abbey Road Plates, followed by an instance of the C1 gate, and then some SSL channel. Once again, just taking out some top end and some low end, plus a little bit of low mid. And then we have this bus 3, which is actually being sent to this dead trigger track, which is muted. And all this is basically just to feed the side chain of the gate. So it goes to this trigger track, which has got no output. And then in the C1 gate up here, that's being fed by this sidechain bus 3. So every time the kick and the snare hit, it's triggering the gate. And that sounds like this with that gated reverb in now. So really that is all that's needed in order to achieve a big punchy pop drum sound. It's very simple. The processing is very simple. All of this is very simple. And as I said at the beginning, this can apply to live drums, to samples, to virtual drums, whatever it may be. So let's have one more playthrough before and after, take a listen to what difference all this processing has made. For the most part, this is super simple. There's not loads of processing. It's mostly just the SSL E-Channel, which I absolutely love, plus a bit of drum bus processing and some gated reverb as well to give it that explosiveness. And there you have this super punchy, explosive pop drum sound. So if you like what you've seen in this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.